SFBBO, promoting sustainability by engaging communities for more than 40 years. Our Birdie Hour Speaker Series is a free virtual program. On August 20th, 2025, San Francisco Bay Wildlife Society Executive Director Sirena Lao gave a talk, SFBay National Wildlife Refuges, Introduction, Challenges, and How to Help for our community.
I used to work with SFBBO, and I was the environmental education specialist for about 4 years, and I helped to kick off this Birdie Hour speaker series, so it is great to see it continuing to go on strong. And it's also very nice to see a lot of familiar names in the participant list, a lot of names that I recognize from my time at SFBBO, and also some new ones from my time here at the San Francisco Bay Wildlife Society. So thank you all so much for being here. A little bit other information about me is that while I was at SFBBO, I also worked as a biologist. So I was helping do a lot of bird surveys as well as habitat restoration work. And that was kind of my intro to our San Francisco Bay National Wildlife Refuges. And so I started working here at San Francisco Bay Wildlife Society, which I'll call the Society for short, at the beginning of 2024 as the interpretive specialist and the Watershed Watchers Program Coordinator. So what that means is a lot of what I was doing was planning out programs to do at the Environmental Education Center in Alviso. So we would bring a lot of people to the refuge for public programs, for field trips, for volunteer events. And so we would reach thousands of people every single year, bring them out to the refuge to enjoy this beautiful place. And earlier this year, in January, half of my position also shifted to becoming the executive director. So not necessarily something that I was expecting to do, but here we are. You know, this is what we needed. So that is what I'm doing now. I'm still doing half of that Watershed Watchers program work, but also doing a lot of admin and other things for keeping the refuge, you know, up and running, keeping the society running. So that's what I'm doing now. And so today I am really excited to be here to talk about our San Francisco Bay National Wildlife Refuges. A lot of people don't really understand what they are or know that they exist, and they're right here in our backyard. And so I want to walk you through our wonderful refuges and talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we're facing right now and what we are doing to help and what you can do as well. So, first of all, a little bit about us, the San Francisco Bay Wildlife Society. So we are a nonprofit friends group that supports the San Francisco Bay National Wildlife Refuges. And this is a little confusing because we have a similar name to another nonprofit organization called the Wildlife Society, which is a nonprofit for wildlife professionals, and they have a Bay Area chapter, but we're separate organizations. We do partner with them here and there, but we just have similar names. But what does it mean exactly to be a friends group, right? So friends groups are organizations that have a specific friends partnership agreement with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So we are part of a network of about 200 friends groups throughout the country that all have this shared purpose of really focusing on supporting a refuge or a refuge complex. So our Friends Partnership Agreement allows us to do things like conduct programs at the refuge and apply for funding and accept donations that benefits the refuge. We also can help recruit for volunteers who do work on the refuge. We can advocate for it and, you know, things like that. So that's a little bit different from what other organizations do on refuges too. Of course, refuges have lots of partners like SFBBO. They do a lot of work on the refuge too, but they have a different kind of agreement. It might be a cooperative agreement, or in some cases, a special use permit that allows them to partner with Fish and Wildlife. So that's kind of the difference there. And, you know, we as a friends group we think of ourselves as part of the refuge family, but we are independent organizations and we don't represent U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We're trying to be a good friend to support them. So just a little bit of background about our National Wildlife Refuge system. They are our public lands. So National Wildlife Refuges exist in all 50 states and 5 US territories. There are currently 573 National Wildlife Refuges, as well as 38 wetland management districts. These are waterfowl production areas. There's also 5 national marine monuments that are part of the refuge system, and those are also co-managed with NOAA. And then altogether, all of these make up 96 million acres of land and 760 million marine acres. And so the mission of the National Wildlife Refuge System really focuses on conservation. Wildlife conservation drives everything about national wildlife refuges, including why they were established, what kinds of recreational opportunities you can do there, and the resource management techniques that they use. And it is, of course, to conserve the wildlife, the fish, the plants, and also to benefit the people, right? Benefit us Americans who benefit from these refuges. So you'll notice in the map, this is a little outdated, but a lot of them are located along coastlines or along bodies of water, waterways. And so it really goes to speak to how important these kinds of ecosystems are for conserving our wildlife. So zooming in now to our National Wildlife Refuge complex here in the San Francisco Bay Area. Our complex is made up of 7 national wildlife refuges, which you'll see in this map here. And 3 of these are open to the public. So that is San Pablo Bay in the North Bay, Don Edwards here in the Bay, and then Salinas River as you get down towards the Monterey area. The other 4 refuges are closed to the public because, of course, they've got very sensitive habitat and sensitive wildlife. So those are not accessible generally to the public. For the society, we do support the refuge complex as a whole, but as far as the individual refuges, we mostly focus on the 4 southern refuges. So that's Farallon Islands, Don Edwards, Ellicott Slough, and Salinas River. And the other 3 northern refuges are supported by Friends of San Pablo Bay National Wildlife Refuge. So they are another friends group that works in the area and does a lot of work to help out too. So now my goal here is to kind of do a flyby of each of these refuges, get to know them a little bit. So we'll kind of go through and talk about each one just a little, give you a little taste of them. So starting in the North Bay, so I'm going to start with Antioch Dunes National Wildlife Refuge. And Antioch Dunes is the smallest of our refuges here in the complex at just 76 acres. It's up here in Contra Costa County along the San Joaquin River, and it's made up of 2 disjunct parcels. And so this is the last remaining sand dune habitat in that area. And some interesting history, I think, is that back in 1906, when there was the San Francisco earthquake, that really leveled a lot of the buildings in the city. And so there was a huge demand for sand to make the bricks to rebuild. And so there was large-scale sand mining and industrial development that led to the fragmentation of a lot of the sand dune habitat. So these 2 units here at Antioch Dunes are the last ones in that area because so much of it was mined. So this is a glimpse of what that habitat looks like, right? And this is, not all that far from us comparatively. We've got sand dunes and riparian stream bank right here. And so it's a pretty unique habitat. Of course, there's very little of this left, as you can imagine. And something that's really special about Antioch Dunes is that it was the first National Wildlife Refuge to be established specifically to protect endangered plants and insects. And I think I've read that it might be the only one that has that designation as well. So these endangered species include the Antioch Dunes evening primrose, the Contra Costa wallflower, and the Lang's metalmark butterfly. And the Lang's metalmark butterfly was one of the first insects listed under the Endangered Species Act. So these are all species that are pretty much endemic to the area, and almost exclusively on Antioch Dunes, although there might be some cultivated populations here and there, but they, of course, are very rare species. So that is one of the special things about Antioch Dunes here. So as we go down the San Joaquin River and move on over to the next refuge, we land at Marin Islands National Wildlife Refuge. And this one is composed of two small islands off the coast of San Rafael. And so those two islands, East and West Marin Islands, make up about 13 acres. So they're pretty tiny. But the refuge also includes 326 acres of submerged tidelands that are parts of the state ecological reserve as well. So prior to becoming a national wildlife refuge, these islands were privately owned, and in the 80s, they were put up for sale, and local people advocated for their protection, and a lot of agencies actually banded together to help purchase and establish the refuge. So we're lucky to have these islands today. They are actually incredibly diverse as far as their ecosystems go. So there are actually 7 distinct habitat types that are on these islands, and they support over 100 different native species of plants. And that represents about 10% of the native flora in Marin County. So incredibly diverse area. And originally, the Marin Islands were established to provide important wintering habitat for migratory birds, as well as nesting habitat for water birds in particular. And up until about a decade ago or so, the Marin Islands hosted the largest rookeries of egrets and herons in Northern California. And unfortunately, that's no longer the case. There was large-scale nest failure and abandonment in around 2015, 2016. The reasons aren't entirely clear as far as I know, but there was a lot of long-term monitoring that was happening there by Audubon Canyon Ranch at the time, which, if you're familiar with the Waterbird program at SFBBO, you know, they were both doing that kind of work. Although those rookeries are no longer there, what is exciting is that in the last 2 years, there have been nesting bald eagles. So there's still great stuff happening out there. The other distinction for Marin Islands is that they were also one of the very few places where black oyster catchers were nesting as well. So I think they're still there, but I'm not entirely sure. So that's Marin Islands. And then if we go up to San Pablo Bay National Wildlife Refuge, which was mentioned in the comments there, this is the largest of the northern refuges, and it is publicly accessible. It is considered an urban wildlife refuge, which means that it's one of about 100 refuges in the system that are within 25 miles of a population of 250,000 people or more. So that's great because these are public lands that are really accessible to a lot of people. San Pablo Bay National Wildlife Refuge is made up of over 21,000 acres, and that does include some leased lands with the California State Lands Commission. So again, this is open to the public. You can go and visit and explore the trails. And this is a taste of what you would see out there, right? It's got vast stretches of tidal marsh out there, so pickleweed as far as the eye can see. And as a lot of you probably know, if you're familiar with SFBBO, the San Francisco Bay Area has lost about 85 to 90% of the historic marshes that used to be here. And so this refuge was established to support this wetland habitat and the endangered species that depend on it. And in addition, the migratory birds also really love this area as well. So it is an important wintering and stopover habitat for a lot of birds. So well worth a visit, of course. One important distinction here for San Pablo Bay National Wildlife Refuge is that it has the largest wintering population of canvasbacks on the West Coast. So wait for the winter to come and you've got tons of ducks out there. In addition, as is probably going to look familiar for those of you who are familiar with Don Edwards National Wildlife Refuge 2, we've got a couple of endangered species that rely on San Pablo Bay's habitats, including the endangered salt marsh harvest mouse and the endangered California ridgeways rail. So these are 2 species that really depend on the salt marsh habitat here in the Bay Area, and they don't really exist anywhere else. So San Pablo Bay is one of those areas that they depend on. And the refuge has begun doing some monthly volunteer habitat restoration events. I believe they're on the first Thursdays of the month. So they started to post that on Eventbrite. So if you wanted to go out and help make a difference, you can definitely check that out, and feel free to reach out to me if you want the links for those. So those are our northern refuges. And now we're going to go off the coast all the way out to Farallon Islands National Wildlife Refuge, which is a very, very special place. It's located about 28 miles off the coast of San Francisco. And if it's a really clear day, I believe you can see them with your bare eyes from the city. And this is the oldest refuge in our complex, having been established in 1909. And gosh, what a special place. I'm going to focus a little bit on Farallons right now, just because it's, especially for this audience, right? So the bird life is amazing there. So the habitat there is this set of rocky islands. And this picture here on the right is a picture of how you actually get on and off the island. So you do have to go by boat and get lifted on and off with some big equipment. And this is, it's because it's rocky. There's not a nice beach to land on, really. But importantly for these islands, they are alongside the really cold, productive waters of the California Current upwelling system. So that makes it an incredibly productive location. So to give you an idea of that, the Farallon Islands does support the largest seabird nesting colony in the lower 48 states, and that includes 13 different species of seabirds. So the Farallon Islands supports the world's largest colonies of Brandt's cormorants, which you can see here, as well as the ashy storm petrels and western gulls. So largest colonies breed on the Farallon Islands. Other breeding seabirds include California gulls in small numbers, common murres, pigeon guillemots, rhinoceros auklet, Cassin's auklet, Leach's storm petrel, pelagic cormorants, black oyster catcher, and tufted puffins. And so what's interesting here is that tufted puffins have been declining throughout much of their range, but the Farallon's colony is I think the only one in the lower 48, where their populations are actually increasing. So lots and lots of sea life there, seabird life. And I need to just pause on this photo. Every time I see it, I am just in awe. So these are common murres that are nesting on Farallon Islands. This was taken in April of this year by the refuge manager there, Jerry. And gosh, just look at the scale of that, right? There are so many of these birds. There's hundreds and thousands of them. And what's interesting about the common murres, besides how dense and how treacherous this ledge is that they're all on, is that back in the California gold rush days, they were the subject of really massive commercial egg harvesting. And so, decades of this egg harvest reduced the colony from probably as much as 1 million birds down to only about 6,000 birds by the early 20th century. So huge reduction in their numbers. Thankfully, with the protection of the islands and management, that has allowed the colony to bounce back. So they are now at over 350,000 birds. So you can get a glimpse of that here. Truly, truly amazing. Other notable things about the Farallon Islands is that it's a haul-out site or breeding site for 5 species of pinnipeds, so seals and sea lions. So that includes the California sea lion, harbor seal, stellar sea lion, northern elephant seal, which you can see one right here, and northern fur seals. So these, just like the murres with their eggs, they were hunted extensively for quite a long time. So most of them actually disappeared for a while. And with protections and management, the elephant seals actually returned in the early 70s, and then the northern fur seals returned in the 90s. And their numbers continue to grow quite a lot, especially for the fur seals and the sea lions. Their numbers have been exploding on the Farallon Islands. And because of, all of this high diversity and the huge numbers of breeding birds and everything in one place, and these these little islands here on the Farallones. The Farallon Islands really act as kind of a canary in the coal mine for understanding how our marine ecosystems are doing in the Central California area. So studies there have been happening for a long time. U.S. Fish and Wildlife actually partners with Point Blue Conservation Science. They've been doing that for more than 50 years. So they've had researchers out there studying these species that are calling the Farallon Islands home. And it's a really great way to understand how the ecosystem is changing really quickly. So it's really important work that they do out there. And of course, it's a really important area for training the future generations of researchers too, who get to work out there. So Farallon Islands, really incredible place. And I didn't want to leave without mentioning a couple of endemic species. So these two exist nowhere else in the world except the Farallon Islands. There's a camel cricket there and an arboreal salamander that lives only there and nowhere else in the world. Okay, so as we go back onto shore, we're gonna head over to Ellicott Slough National Wildlife Refuge, which is down near the Santa Cruz area. So this is a refuge that is actually made up of 4 disjunct units, and they're quite diverse as well. So you get, these beautiful areas that are in each of these units. You've got woodland, chaparral, all kinds of different freshwater habitats, especially. And so Ellicott Slough was actually established to protect an endangered species called the Santa Cruz long-toed salamander. And so actually, the purpose of Ellicott Slough has expanded since its original founding as other species started to become listed as endangered as well. So Ellicott Slough is also now protecting endangered California red-legged frogs as well as California tiger salamanders. So compared to all the other refuges, I would say Ellicott Slough is the haven for our endangered amphibians. And this year, all the ponds where the amphibians were breeding were holding water this year. So as far as I know, they did successfully breed this year, which is good news. And then if we go down a little further south to Salinas River National Wildlife Refuge, this is just about 11 miles north of Monterey, and it conserves the area where the Salinas River empties out into the Monterey Bay. And this is another refuge that is open to the public, so you can come and visit, explore the trails. And the refuge was initially established because of its important location along the Pacific Flyway. So it is a great place to go look for birds too. This is, of course, a taste of the habitat that's out there. You've got coastal dunes and beaches, right? Just absolutely lovely. In addition to these salt marshes, saline ponds, and these grassland and riparian areas. And of course, they are protecting some important endangered species too. So as many of you probably know, if you're familiar with SFBBO's work, we've got western snowy plovers, and the Pacific coast population is threatened. So there are the habitat there, of course, is the sandy beaches and the dunes, right, that they're using. It's a little different from what we're seeing in Don Edwards, but probably more of what you might expect for plovers. In addition, there's also the Smith's blue butterfly, which is endangered, and it uses 2 different species of buckwheats as its host plants. And if you wanted to get involved out there, I do know that, as last I heard anyway, they were planning to do some weeding sometime this fall to pull out ice plant from the sand dunes and help to, maintain the habitat out there for these species. And last, but certainly not least, Don Edwards San Francisco Bay National Wildlife Refuge. So as we come up to the bay, this is our largest wildlife refuge in the complex, and it's composed of over 30,000 acres. It holds the distinction of being one of the first and largest urban national wildlife refuges. And it was established largely as a result of grassroots efforts by local community members who were concerned about the state of the bay at the time, because there was a lot of dumping raw sewage into the bay, there was development of the tidal marshes. And so thanks to these efforts and advocacy of local citizens, we now have this wonderful, wonderful refuge right here in the backyard of so many people. And Don Edwards is also the home of the refuge headquarters, so the headquarters for the complex. We do have a small visitor center in the Fremont unit, and of course the Environmental Education Center where I often work out of in Alviso. In addition, you can also visit trails in the Ravenswood unit and Bear Island units on the peninsula, and SFBBO knows all of these areas well. The Waterbirds program, Plover program, habitats, they all do work in these areas. So they're out there doing a lot of the on-the-ground surveying and planting, weeding, and all that kind of work. And of course, we've got a variety of habitat here as well, lots of salt marshes, of course, salt ponds, sloughs and mudflats, as well as, of course, the vernal pools. So vernal pools, if you're not familiar, are seasonal wetlands. So they are ephemeral. They're there, after the rains come in, they do flood, and they dry out by the time it gets into the summer. So because you can imagine, they are pretty sensitive. It is close to the public, that area, Warm Springs. But the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service botanist, Idona, she does do annual tours there when the wildflowers are in bloom. So well worth a visit if you can make it out there. Really, really incredible plant life, especially. So very popular with folks who are into botany for sure. And of course, some of these should look familiar, right? We already talked about these species, but Don Edwards does provide an important home for salt marsh harvest mouse again, and California ridgeways rails, both of which really do rely on those tidal marshes for their ecosystem. And then we've got the western snowy plovers that SFBBO monitors quite a lot here at the refuge, and they are relying on those former salt evaporation ponds for breeding habitat. And I know that they are going to be finishing their monitoring season in the next month or so. So it'll be interesting to see how they're doing this year. In addition to these endangered and threatened species, we've also got endangered species that are in the vernal pools. So Warm Springs has Contra Costa goldfields, vernal pool tadpole shrimps, and California tiger salamanders that are living out there. So those surveys do happen every year, and the society does actually employ a wildlife biology associate to help with that work every year too. So we're also involved in those surveys. So those are our 7 refuges, right? Absolutely incredibly wonderful places, super diverse, and there's so many that are so accessible to a lot of people. But of course, there are many challenges that our refuges face, and so I wanted to go over a few of them today. And you can probably think of many others, but I thought these would be relevant and important for people to know about. So one of the big challenges has been staffing over the years. It's not just limited to this year. There's been last several years, a lot of the positions that people are retiring out of have not been filled. So a lot of empty slots, basically. And since 2010, it's estimated that about 30% of the staff has been lost. So it's considered that none of the refuges are fully staffed in the entire system, unfortunately. Here at Don Edwards, we're also experiencing some of that too. So this year there's been a hiring freeze, so no real new hiring much. There's also been the early retirements or deferred resignation programs as part of the workforce reduction efforts. So just this year, about an additional 25% of the refuge system staff have opted to take those. So the workforce has shrunk quite a bit this year. And here at the complex, there's only 15 full-time equivalent employees left. So that's quite a loss. That's 15 people across 7 refuges, which is really not nearly enough to do all the work that we want to do out there. Since February, so we've lost 2 of our biologists. So that actually represents about a third of the biologists in the complex. Notably, Salinas River and Ellicott Slough, the 2 southern refuges, they only have 1 staff left, and that's the refuge manager. So she is responsible for these 2 refuges all by herself. For Don Edwards, We did lose our longtime maintenance lead. He retired in the summer, and he did a lot of the work maintaining the levees. We also no longer have a refuge manager. She retired last month. So it's pretty bare bones right now. And so the remaining staff at the complex are really taking on a lot of work to try to get things done and trying to prioritize the work that needs to get done out there. So that does mean that there's also not as much capacity left to combat issues that we might deal with every day, like illegal dumping or litter or graffiti. So, there's a lot of issues that come with not having enough staff out there, and that's a common theme among all the refuges in the system, really. And that's also related to the funding challenges that our refuge system is experiencing. So there's this document here that the National Wildlife Refuge Association has put out. And National Wildlife Refuge Association is a nonprofit that supports the refuge system on a national level. So I wanted to share this with you, and hopefully you can see that okay. So they came out with this document in June that kind of outlines some of the funding challenges. So they have some trends since 2010 published here, and you'll see that the raw numbers are like, they fluctuate a little bit, but are relatively stable-ish, but that doesn't account for issues related to inflation, right? So their estimate is that the refuge system really needs over $2 billion to really fulfill their mission and do everything that they want to do. But unfortunately, they're nowhere near that as far as appropriations go. And there are some concerns about, the budget request for the next fiscal year too. So, there's going to be even more cuts likely happening. In addition to that, we've got service delivery trends. So while the funds have not really kept pace with the needs, visitation has been increasing over the years, which is great, right? We want people to come to the refuges, but as this is showing, the workforce has also declined. So there's fewer staff out there to greet all these wonderful visitors, unfortunately. So it's a challenge for sure. And then I also wanted to point out this graphic here. This shows kind of the funding and the amount of land managed by the different public lands agencies. So it's a nice comparison here. We love our public lands overall, right? But it does show like these colors represent the ones on the bison represent the amount of acreage covered by each public land system. So National Wildlife Refuge System is shown in the blue with the land and the water, the marine acres. And then these circles off to the side are representative of the amount of staff and the funding that they have. So National Wildlife Refuge System really gets a very, very, very small amount especially compared to some of these other public land systems. So, it's a huge challenge across the board. So just wanted to share that with you. And National Wildlife Refuge Association is a really great resource for understanding what's happening and for seeing what kinds of actions that they're recommending for the public too. So when we look at locally here at our system, we see examples of this too, where one example would be the Farallon Islands, right? So prior to this year even, they've had to do a lot of prioritizing what kind of work they're going to do. And ultimately, unfortunately, Fish and Wildlife determined that they can no longer staff the Farallon Islands year-round or fund Point Blue's work there. So there was, this really real possibility that the biologists that have been there would have to leave this fall and winter, which would be the first time that there would have been no human presence on the islands for probably over 150 years. And that's a significant break in this incredible long-term research that happens there. Now, this year, Point Blue has been fundraising so that they can continue that work. And very, very recently, they actually got some major donations. So thankfully, they are covered for this fall and winter season, so they will still be out there. But it is a temporary stopgap, right? There's still the very real possibility that the work might have to stop next winter season. So that also speaks to an increasing reliance on the refuge for our partners to be able to do this kind of work too. Another example is the Environmental Education Center too, where I work out of. So some of you might be aware that in 2023, 2024, there were lots of community meetings for reimagining the EEC, getting a new building. Unfortunately, those plans are on hold, and that's largely as a result of lack of funding and also, frankly, the optics of trying to get a new building while lots of federal buildings are being shuttered. So we and SFBBO are still working out of the building, but it's still closed to the public because the refuge doesn't really have the capacity to ensure that it's safe for the public to use or to staff it regularly. So that's kind of the status of that. And then this picture here is actually a levee at A1 levee after the 2023 storms. So there was quite a lot of damage to that levee. And so that's another issue that we face with declines in funding is declines in the capacity to maintain the infrastructure on the refuges. Thankfully for this example, at least, National Wildlife Refuge Association and the Society were able to do a little bit of advocacy to help secure emergency storm damage funds to help get this levee fixed up. So we were able to do that towards the end of 2024. Now, these challenges related to funding are also exacerbated by increases in unpredictability this year too. So an example of that was that Fish and Wildlife Service purchase cards were limited to just $1 earlier this year, right? Which makes it more or less impossible for them to buy the materials that they needed for some of their work for a little while. In addition, there are ever-changing travel restrictions, so that affects, what conferences can these biologists go to share their work or to get more information, things like that. So there's all kinds of unpredictability happening right now. And these challenges aren't just restricted to Fish and Wildlife Service, it also affects partners. A lot of partners, as I'm sure you know, have had some grants rescinded or grant programs have been canceled altogether, which makes it all the more difficult for these partners to raise funds to do the work on the refuge. So a lot of challenges right now. Now, with that said, there are lots of ways that we're trying to support the refuge and that we all can do our part as well. So here at the Society, some things that we do include, we have separate funding, thankfully, from that's not dependent on the federal government. So we are able to host public programs and field trips to bring the public to the refuge. So this is some example of the work at Don Edwards that we've done in the last year. So the two pictures on top are, one of them is a public program at in the Ravenswood area, and then one of them is a field trip for De Anza College. So we've been doing lots of field trips for colleges and other groups. We also do host volunteer events. So the bottom images there, you've got coastal cleanup there, and we also do partner with SFBBO and Keep Paracoupe Beautiful on the Tending for Tomorrow events or Planting for Pollinators in the Marsh events. So we are able to participate in those and help with that too. And then that bottom right image is from this year's Martian Summer Camp, which is an annual tradition at the refuge. This year is actually the 46th year of a free camp at the refuge, which is pretty incredible. And so we play a really large part in helping to put that on. So we get some separate funding to hire somebody to help out the environmental education specialist at the refuge and organize this camp. It's a really incredible effort. And related to that, we do have a what we call our Blue Goose Transportation Fund or Bus Fund. So we do fundraise to secure buses to get people to the refuge for summer camp, but also for school field trips during the year. So Newark Unified in particular often has trouble with securing buses. So our bus fund has been really critical for continuing their field trips there year after year. In addition, we also help to support the recognition of volunteers and other refuge needs. So that top right image is Team Spinach, which is a group of volunteers who helped got to the Farallon Islands to help remove spinach that would be encroaching on a lot of that seabird habitat. So that was happening during a time when those refuge purchase cards were limited to $1. So we were able to actually fund those supplies when they couldn't get them. So we do kind of keep a little bit of a fund for these kinds of emergencies. So especially now with so much unpredictability. And then finally, we also operate a very small nature store out of the visitor center in Fremont. So refuge staff can no longer staff that visitor center. So it's entirely volunteer run by our volunteers. And so we keep it open on the weekends as much as we can. And it is often one of the first interactions that a visitor may have with the refuge, right? So we do think it's an important outreach and education tool. And finally, what are some ways that you can help, right? So you can you can volunteer with those volunteer events that I mentioned, whether it's with us, with SFBBO, with Save the Bay. All of these organizations do a lot of the habitat restoration work. And so you have your pick of organizations helping to support the refuge. And you can also take actions at home that protect our habitats and watersheds too. So I mentioned early on that part of my position is Watershed Watchers Program Coordinator, right? And so with those programs, we always share with people how actions at home affect our watersheds. And a lot of our watersheds, so the rivers and creeks, they do run to the bay, right, to the refuge. So making sure that we are responsible with how we treat our water resources, what goes down our storm drains, all of that does end up affecting the refuge too, because our water ends up there. And then finally, I do also highly recommend, if you haven't been there, visit your national wildlife refuges, right? Understand what are the the amazing things that we offer at our refuges, and bring other people there too. So many of the people that we interact with in our programs have never been to the refuge before they came on our field trip, right? So getting people to our refuges to appreciate these places is one of the best ways to kind of encourage people to care for them and to become advocates for them as well. And certainly share the story of our national wildlife refuges, and share why these lands matter. And this goes for individuals, but also for the organizations that work on our refuges, right? We can share why these lands are so important to conserve and why we should, maintain them. Share that with your community, share that with your representatives. We've heard from representatives that they need to hear from their constituents about how we care for our refuges too, and how we should be supporting them. And if you do happen to see refuge staff, let them know that you appreciate them. It's been a hard year, right? So, it can be demoralizing, it can be stressful for them. So if you have the opportunity, definitely let them know that you appreciate the work that they do. They're so passionate about what they do on the refuges, so I'm sure they would really appreciate hearing that. And also related to that, there are these signs for the feedback that you may have seen if you visit a refuge recently. So these went up last month. We have them at our visitor center in Fremont, at the EEC, and I believe at Bear Island as well, for Don Edwards. So if you heard about these signs that went up for the national parks a few months ago, it's the QR codes that, the goal was to kind of get feedback about information on signage that they might want to change. So a lot of times what people were doing was sharing what they love about the parks, right? And so we're encouraging people to do that for our refuges too. Those do get read by Fish and Wildlife employees. They do get sent to our complex. So if you get a chance to come across one of these signs and you can leave some feedback about what you love about our refuges, that's, I think, a really great testament to the importance of these places. And then finally, of course, you can join a number of organizations that are helping our national wildlife refuges. So that does include us, other friends groups. If you're, living outside of the area, you visit other wildlife refuges. There are, of course, friends groups all over. There's the National Wildlife Refuge Association, as I mentioned already, and then there's also the Public Lands Alliance, which supports all kinds of public land systems. And, of course, there's our local organizations as well. So SFBBO, Save the Bay, as I mentioned, right? All of these organizations are doing really great work on refuges, and they're all places that we can all do our part to support too. And so that's all I had for you today. And there are many ways that you can connect with us and join us for all kinds of upcoming events that we have coming up. You can follow us. This is how you can learn about everything that's going on. We also publish a quarterly newsletter with the Refuge. So if you wanted to read about updates about what's happening at the Refuge, that's another really great resource that you can subscribe to. And it's free, it's online, and we only send it once a quarter. So yeah. And I'm more than happy to take any questions. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Sirena. That was a really fantastic presentation and a lot of great information. And I'm glad that you've shared so many different ways that everybody can get involved and support the work that you're doing in your support of the refuge system. And just want to underscore how critical the refuge system is to SFBBO's ability to do our work and so many other organizations. We're really a network of groups that work together to forward our kind of collective mission. Well, we do have some questions in the chat. Lynn asks, is there any public access to the Marin Islands National Wildlife Refuge?
So Marina Islands National Wildlife Refuge is closed to the public, and there are supposed to be some restrictions for how close you can get to it. You can kind of kayak around the area, but they do want to keep people about I want to say it's something along the lines of 100 feet or so away. They have had some issues with trespassing, unfortunately, but they're working on putting up some updated signage so that people know that it is off limits to the public. Um, yeah, the exception was when there were the surveys happening for those water birds. The people doing that work at Audubon Canyon Ranch did get permission to land on there and do. Well, I don't know if they landed actually. They were at least circling the area doing their surveys.
Thank you. And if you have questions for Sirena, I think it's a small enough group that if you want to unmute yourself, it's okay to ask your question or share your appreciation. If anybody wants to do that. I have one question that came up when I was listening to you. Are you seeing any local governments, like city governments, kind of pitching in or leaning in to help solve some of these problems or partner with the refuge and with you?
So it's hard to say, every city is also affected to some extent by what's happening federally too, right? So it can be hard. The refuge does partner with cities, for some of the programs, but we are trying to find more funding too. Uh, we recently talked to the city of Menlo Park, for example. So, we'll see. I think everywhere is facing some challenges right now. So it's tough all across the board.
Karen, did you have a question or a comment?
I did. I was curious if Drawbridge is part of the refuge or if that's separate.
Yeah. Drawbridge is part of the refuge. So for those of you who don't know, Drawbridge is a historic town that's used to be out in kind of the Alviso area, but it is sinking into the marsh. And so it's no longer inhabited, of course, but that is part of the refuge. That area of the refuge right now is closed due to construction for the South Bay Shoreline project, which is raising the levee right now. So once that opens up, there is a viewpoint where you could hike out to it and see it from the trail, but that is currently closed off. Hopefully it'll be reopened at least temporarily soon. But so it is definitely part of the refuge. And from what I understand, the refuge and the society used to do tours so that we like drove people out to see it. So pretty cool.
I
Hopefully this
remember
will come back.
walking in ankle deep mud to go out there 20 years ago. It was pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Thanks, Karen. I remember going out there too. It's a pretty cool spot. Thanks for that question. We do have another question from Carlton. Who might be a good contact at San Pablo National Wildlife Refuge? WS or SFBBWS?
Yeah, so I think that's Friends of San Pablo Bay National Wildlife Refuge that you might be referring to there. So I do have the contact for the president who is out there, and then for the staff, there's one of the refuge rangers is pretty active, so I could try to pull those up and share those. Or yeah, if Carlton, you want to shoot me an email, I'd be happy to get you connected with them.
Well, we've got a lot of comments in the comment section, thanking you, supporting you, telling you that we all miss you here at SFBBO, but so proud of the work that you're doing there and happy that you're doing it. Does anybody else have anything else they'd like to ask Sirena, or any comments before we close? He says, thank you for putting together this webinar. I could see a lot of thought was put into it on top of the work you already do under such stressful conditions. So, and thank you, Sirena, for taking the time out to come back to SFBBO and do a birdie hour for us. And we hope that we'll see you at future birdie hours as well.
Of course, thank you for having me and for allowing me to share the story of our refuges. It's again really great to see so many familiar names and faces, and for these positive comments and all this support for our refuges. They really are incredible places that are underappreciated a lot of times, and kind of fly under the radar.
Well, let me know if there's any links that you want me to share with the people who registered. We have a lot of people who registered that I think are going to watch the video later, and so we can share that. Thanks everybody for all the support you give to SFBBO, to birds, to organizations like the one Serena's leading now. We are really a community, and we all need to kind of work together to keep everything moving forward. So I hope everybody has a wonderful evening, and hope to see you at our next event. Take care.
Thank you so much.
SFBBO is a nonprofit. With your support, we will continue to inform decision makers, inspire people to act, and involve diverse communities in our work. Please visit our website to learn more and get involved today.